Okay. I wonder what you think about just this kind of vision in general. Like, how often do you think, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that you should or will or can have a vision like this at some point in your life? Let's just have like a little democracy here. Who thinks, yes, at some point in my life, I should and will or have or I'm going to have a vision like this in my life? Who thinks that? You're scared. Why are you so scared? It's just voting. Who thinks, no, probably not. This is like something that happened to somebody in the Bible. It might happen to Brian, but it's not going to happen to me, probably. Who thinks that? Who's kind of there? And then the people that didn't vote, I'm interested why you didn't vote. What's the other option here?
I didn't hear you. Someone said
Yeah, I wasn't listening. Okay, good. Nice. When you ask for votes, I just blank out. It's fine. It's funny to me because I think that even our view of something like this, an encounter with God like this, a vision, this sort of supernatural dream that he has, I wonder what it is that we feel about it, because I think it's hard for us to enter into a text that we frankly think is just not for us. I do think there's a couple kind of Christians. Most of us, I would think, have this sort of view that that's something that happened in the Bible. It might happen occasionally to some extraordinary people, but it's probably not going to happen to me. Something like that is not something you're looking for in your life. And then there's others of you, and you know you are, who think this happens every week to you. There seems to be no end to your revelations and visions. And you're constantly seeking them, constantly looking for them, and constantly having them, these incredible life-changing revelations. And the truth is, I think you see where I'm going with this, the truth is something in between. It's not, frankly, these things are not supposed to happen every week in your life. They're not even supposed to happen every year possibly in your life, but they are, I believe, something that is normative to those that walk with God. That it should be, will be, something that is a part of all of your lives at some point. Now, this may only happen a few times, maybe even just one time in your life, but I promise you, you will have this kind of encounter with God. The danger, I think, of saying, okay, it's going to happen a lot, like it's something I want to pursue a lot. Like that was such a great experience, having that thing that happened to me at Bethel. I want to keep doing that. In fact, I want to make a church around that where we have these incredible experiences and we talk about them every week. And then we'll have some sort of like competition with each other about who has more revelations and who has more encounters with God and who has more visions with God. And it just gets really out of whack. But the truth is, it is a biblical norm almost to have this kind of encounter with God. But I'll explain maybe why later this can't happen very often in your life. I should say too that a part of the context here and part of what we see later in the story, this sort of jumps ahead a little bit in Jacob's story, but what we see is because of the rift now, that the blessing, so he gets this connived blessing, but something that God wanted to give him, and now that the blessing of God is resting upon the wrong son, now that the blessing of the father is resting on the wrong son, it creates a rift between the twins. And now the brothers are at enmity, and Isaac knows that, and so he sends Jacob away. He says, look, you need to get out of here, and you need to go, get away from your brother. He's very upset right now. And there's a good chance your brother, who's good with weapons and so on, will kill you, and you're good with cooking, and so that's not going to help you in hand-to-hand combat with Esau. You didn't want to tangle with Esau, and he was upset. And so Jacob is on the run. I think it's ironic. I'm not sure if it's a paradox or if it's just ironic that he gets the blessing of God, and that makes him a fugitive. That it's actually God's hand on him, God's promise to him, God's blessing on him, that creates all this conflict and turmoil and trouble in his life. Because when God chooses Jacob, he upsets the order of things, the pattern of this world. And it is always that way. When God chooses the weak things of this world to confound the wise don't sit back and say, that's fine. The wise don't sit back and say, well, isn't that wonderful? Let's have some folky wisdom from that unlikely, uneducated person. No, the wise resist. The wise fight back. And this world is theirs, you see, to control. And so you become a fugitive in this world. When God blesses Jacob, he's upsetting the pattern of this world. And now Jacob has entered into conflict, not just with his brother, but with the world itself, with the world as he knows it. It's funny, an interesting fact about me, most of you that know me well know that I don't mind conflict. Some would even say I like conflict or I pursue conflict. I don't think that's true, but I can see why you would think that about me. I'm not afraid of it. I will go directly if there's some sort of issue with a person, even if it's small. I feel very moved and motivated to go grab that person by the collar and talk, and have that sort of confrontational thing. I'm very driven toward confrontation. Now, what I think is interesting, and maybe something you don't know about me, is the reason that I'm so driven to confrontation and conflict is because I'm so upset by a lack of reconciliation or a loss of peace. That actually what it is that drives me to come and talk to people when I think something is wrong is that I can't stand it. I feel like there's something between us. Especially if it's someone that I love. Now, if I don't know you, that's okay. But because that's a different thing, I think. But if I love you, if you're important in my life, I cannot stand even for one moment to feel that there's something between us. And so I rush into the fray. It's not that I want there to be division. It's actually exactly the opposite. It's that I so crave peace. If there's just even one important person in my life that I feel that there's something between them, I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't think about anything else. And that's what drives me to it. I wonder what it's like to be a twin. Some of you know, but most of us don't, what it's like to have that, not just a bond of brotherhood, but we're talking about your twin. And all of a sudden, because of this game you play, because you rolled the dice and you won and you got the blessing, and now you're on the run. Not only do you not get to see your twin, who you've grown up every day together side by side, not only are you now divided from your twin, but you're off into another land, and you think, maybe I'll never see him again. And not only that, but you have to live with the knowledge that he hates you. Worse even, that he's looking for you to harm you. I can't even imagine that kind of anxiety if it were me. And yet this is what God gives to Jacob, what he bestows on him. Conflict. He is blessed, and he is a fugitive. He becomes a citizen in the family of God. What a great gift. But he is banished from his own family. And so he's on the run from his brother, whom he believes and his brother believes he has committed a great crime against. He thinks maybe the relationship is irreparably broken, and so he runs for his life, with his past hanging over his head like a guillotine, like a weight always in the pit of your stomach. Do you know what that feels like, that kind of guilt? You ever lived with it? Are you living with it now? A kind of guilt that smolders inside you, that burns, that the only relief you ever get is when you're asleep or when you're distracted. The kind of guilt that comes from the fact that you actually did it. There's a kind of guilt that's like you're just feeling guilty and you should get over it. And there's a kind of guilt that you feel because, well, you're guilty, you did it. You feel guilty because you are guilty. And that's a different kind of guilt, right? That's not the kind of guilt you're just going to go to your counselor and they're going to help you wash it away, or you're going to watch enough Oprah episodes that you won't feel it anymore because you let it go. It's the kind of guilt that comes because you did something. And it follows you, it haunts you. And I think in this place, he is alone, he feels totally alone, totally afraid, and totally ashamed. And when those three things hit you at one time, have you ever felt, don't raise your hand, but have you ever felt totally alone, totally afraid, and totally ashamed at the same time? It is like the unholy trinity of debilitation. I mean, that will freeze your life. That will lock you up in a kind of paralysis, spiritual, emotional, physical. I don't know, maybe the proper term is depression. I don't know what it is, but it is a paralyzing when loneliness, fear, and shame hits you all at one time. Am I right? It makes me think of fainting goats. There's actually a breed of goat that's called the fainting goat. I find this hilarious. And you're just going to have to forgive me for showing you this video. I just have to show it to you because it's so utterly ridiculous. Luke showed this to me, and I get educated by my kids all the time. But apparently there's a kind of goat, wooden leg goat, the fainting goat, whatever they're called, and they have this problem, this genetic disorder, myotonic, I think it's called, myotonic condition. Anyway, I'm going to show you this video. This is just education, Crucible Education 101. You're going to learn a little bit about animals. It's important. Are we ready to do this? This is just a little YouTube video.
The earliest known domesticated farm animal. Today there are more than 400 million of them worldwide. Then there's this little guy. He doesn't get the attention of, say, the more fashionable Angora goat. He's a fainting goat, and he's got a different talent. Lisa Johnson breeds goats in Florida.
These goats are called myotonic goats. Many people call them fainting goats, wooden leg goats, stiff leg goats, nervous goats, the Tennessee goats, Tennessee meat goats. So they just have all kinds of nicknames for them. They carry the hereditary gene for myotonia congenita. What happens is when the goat is startled or excited, it causes a very temporary stiffening of the muscles. And when the muscles relax, after a few seconds, the goat jumps up and runs on its way.
They don't call them fainting goats for nothing.
It can even be something as simple as being excited over being fed. The adult animals typically they keep their balance better, and what they will end up doing is pretty much bracing on four legs.
While it might seem easy to make fun of the fainting goat, there are scores of breeders who love them just the way they are.
See, I was thinking about Jacob, and I was thinking about how you're kind of like Jacob, and then I thought of fainting goats. This is what I thought of. The truth is we have a lot of fainting Christians, nervous Christians. It's like, you know Jesus, you know that, but somehow all that fear and stuff just locks you up. And when you get locked up like that, it's not like they're actually fainting, right? They're just locking up, and they're locking up, and then they fall over because they can't. And my favorite ones are where like the tail is still wagging, but they fall over, but their tail is still going. I think of Jacob this way, just totally locked up by fear, paralyzed by fear. And yet God comes to him in that place. It should be maybe important to note that he's not seeking God. He's not praying. He's not trying to go to a church service. Not looking for community. He's simply alone and afraid. And he goes to sleep. And if you've ever felt that way, maybe the only reprieve you have or you feel you have is sleep. Sleep sometimes when you really feel blue. It's the thing you long for, the thing you look for. That's why it's so hard to get out of bed when you feel that way. Isn't it interesting that God chooses to come to him there in his sleep? Frozen, afraid. And even that God comes to him while he's on the run. And I do think it's remarkable and important to say also that God comes to him in a place with no name. In terms of the biblical narrative, most of the places that people are and things happen have names. They have names because something else happened in that place at some time, and that place got a name. And because it got a name, now when you're in that place, you recognize that history, that memory, that corporate memory, that this is that place. This is the place that was named for that thing or that people. And it's interesting that Jacob is now in a place with no name. And that actually is remarkable. It's remarkable that it isn't remarked, that there is no name given for the place that he finds himself when he's on the run and alone and afraid and ashamed. But no one has ever cared to notice this place or name this place. It is nowhere. He's on the run from all the places with names. He is in between places, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's that place that has a name, and then there's that place that has a name, and this is where Jacob is. In between places. No place. And guys, it is important to notice that that's where God comes to him. In between places. Afraid, alone, ashamed. He is the liar and the runner. He is in exile. He is blessed by God and his Father, but he's a fugitive in this world, and so he lives in between places, even hiding there. And in the place of exile, God comes to us. He does. Somebody here today needs to hear me say that. If you are in between places and you feel like you're nowhere, I want you to know, I want you to hear my voice say these words: God is coming to you in that place. And if you are in exile, if you feel in any way, emotionally, relationally, career, profession, school, stuck in between places, get ready. It just might be time for God to appear to you and for you to experience an intimacy with God you have not earned and you never asked for and you certainly did not expect. I think he blesses us. I think there's a pattern here. I think he does bless us. As we talked about last week, I think he makes us fugitives from this world that is foreign to him in the first place. And we become no longer citizens of this world and its ways. But then we feel, where do we belong? If not this world, and yet not the one to come. And so he makes a place for us. We belong to the place where he comes to us, those places without names. You see, guys, we're not ready really to see God. We're not ready to hear him, to know him when we're at home in this world. We cannot really. We're not set up to hear and experience and see the reality of God when we find ourselves comfortable and at home in this world. And God must first displace us. Such an important word, displace us. And this is the first gift of his blessing. To displace us from a place that will not ultimately satisfy us anyway, a place whose ways are broken. To jar us free from the death grip of this world. To banish us from a way and a pattern and a culture of death. Because as James put it so rawly, friendship with this world is hatred to God. And friendship with God then means exile in this world. And so God comes to us in the nowhere of our lives. And it becomes somewhere, because that's where he meets us. And when I think about this text, this is the way I think of it. I think of it as almost like the anatomy of an encounter with God. If you think, well, one day you're going to have this, maybe you already have and you want to think about it, but most of you haven't. Most of you are too young and you have yet to have this kind of of vision or encounter from God. And I'm telling you, it's going to happen in your life. You need to be prepared for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare you today for it when it happens. You'll know this is the anatomy of that kind of vision, so that when it happens, you know what to do. Does that sound okay? No? Come on, talk to me. Does that sound okay? First, then, he waits for you in the in-between places. Don't expect God, don't expect this to come to you at the height of your life. Expect when you're your lowest, when you're out of whack, out of sorts, when you feel like a failure, maybe right after a great failure, maybe when you're in between places, then first you need to actually begin to expect this may be the time. This may be that turning point in my life. That in-between place where all you have is Him, where He can show you something you've never seen or known, because nowhere is a blank canvas for Him to paint upon. It does not have any names. That's number one. Number two is that He will show you a vision of this world touched and changed by heaven. You're looking for an image, a vision, a picture actually, some sort of picture. That's what vision means, sight, some sort of picture, image, vision of this world, not floating cherubs or weird clouds or body parts hanging in a room in heaven. No, a real vision that comes from God, that someone actually had that. You'll know if you're Pentecostal, I'll tell you later. That a real vision from God is about this world, somehow touched by that one. His vision comes in a dream while he's asleep, because his waking life is too full of fear and shame and loneliness. It may happen to you the same way. And what does he see? What we might all see in that moment, one way or another. He sees the gradual connection of heaven and earth. That's what Ugo was alluding to. That the resources of heaven, where God is, and where we have citizenship, and where we have a father and a home, are available to earth. More than that, they're being sent to earth, ascending, descending. You might think this is a very specific vision, but it actually isn't. This vision itself is universal. It's something that all of us have to connect to. It's an unveiling that actually heaven and earth are not separated in the heart and mind and work of God, that actually God is busy, always busy in the invisible realm, sending agents to us. And they are returning to Him, mission accomplished, and sent again, coming and going, coming and going. I want you to think about that, not just the picture of it, the image of it. I want you to think about the idea that's behind it. I want you to think that God actually is not separate from us, that He is not, as the deists would say, retreated from creation. He made us and formed us like a master artist, and then walked away and folded His arms and watches us from a distance, wondering if we'll screw it all up, shaking His head as we do. It's a very different view of God. It's a view that God is sending, always sending, that there is this ramp, this invisible highway between heaven and earth. And that God has not left the earth alone. He's not left you alone. And the work we do somehow is being intercepted. It's somehow being touched and influenced by heaven's agents. I'll tell you, this week, I think that there's like pieces of my soul that are being sucked away by this whole building project. I know, it's like, what's that horror movie where they suck the life out of the person's body, or like they actually become like a... Anyway, it's not important. Don't think about horror movies in a church service. That's terrible. That's how I feel, though, like it's sucking the soul out of me. And every day we have these battles, these earthly battles, you know. I'll just give you one recently. We're very close, by the way. We're very, very close. And I've been saying that for some time. So it's bull, don't believe it. Anyway, we feel we're very close. And it comes down to, there's that glass out in the lobby. And the glass to us is indoor glass, and so it should just be regular glass. And this is part of the question. And so we had help from from the fire marshal's office, somebody came out and said, yeah, we agree, it's just regular glass. You don't need to put any sort of fire-rated glass or whatever, which is very expensive. And so we said, great, cool. So we put in regular glass and that, and then we go through our final inspection, and apparently we got the very strictest inspector, the inspector that's like really takes his job seriously. You know, couldn't I just get the guy that doesn't take his job seriously? You know what I mean? The guy that drinks a little or something like that. That's what I wanted. Who's late all the time or something? No, we didn't get that guy. We got the super awesome, perfect, never misses a problem guy, and that's probably better for you if there's a fire or something. You're safer. There is that, you know. So anyway, his thing is like, we want to make all that glass. He just really wanted it to be fire-rated glass. And just so you know, that's $130 per square foot for fire-rated glass. So it's about $20,000 to just do those 5 panes of glass on the one side. So obviously that's not going to happen. That's untenable. So we started looking at other options, and we just fought. We fought with earthly tools, and we started thinking about different sprinkler options, and we're working with them and so on. It just occurs to me, and I'm ashamed that it takes me so long to discover these things, but it occurs to me that we don't just wrestle against flesh and blood. And I keep thinking there's earthly solutions for these kinds of problems, and certainly there must be. And so that's why I keep approaching these things as if there is no ramp between heaven and earth, as if God is sitting back and rooting for me. This is how I really feel. If you could open up my heart and look at the truth, the theology that I feel, the theology that I live, I think that God loves me and is rooting for me from a distance. I think he's pulling for us. I think he's like, man, I hope the underground gets some favor with the fire marshal. You know, I hope that works out for them. You know, come on, fire marshal. Come on. And I feel that he loves me. I feel that he's my friend. And I feel that when we don't and when we fail another inspection or something like that happens, that he's up there going, man, sucks, Brian. I feel you, though. I feel you. And come here, get a hug. Come on and get a hug. But this is a somewhat less potent God, isn't it? A somehow disinvolved God. And it isn't the God that Jacob sees in that nowhere place. He sees a God that is coming and going to do things and assignments that we can't even imagine what they are. And so I begin to pray a little differently. I begin to pray, come on, I hope this works out, but actually pray, God, would you send agents? Would you find a way through this? And I began praying last week. I said, Lord, give us one of these weeks where it's just clearly you, where there is no explanation. And you should know, too, that the fire marshal's office said that's enough on the freebies. There's no more freebies. Until you get a CO, you're not meeting here anymore. There's no more that's going to happen. End of story. That's not happening anymore. And so even as late as this Thursday, we were not allowed legally to meet here. And so we were stuck there with that problem, that glass problem. And something began to change. Part of it is some things we were trying, but really not so much things we were trying. And they were talking to each other, the people in the fire marshal's office. And then there's this little sort of debate started welling up as we prayed. All we could do really was pray. And something was happening in the unseen realm of the fire marshal's office, which is like a whole other world to us. It's like an imaginary world with dragons and fairies and unicorns and stuff. And to me, the fire marshal is a unicorn. You know, I've never seen him. I don't know. But they're having discussions, and apparently there's some debate started to bubble up. That some were saying, I don't think they need that. And others were saying, yeah, but I think they do. And there was like, no, I really don't think they do. And then people started looking into the code and trying to find if there was a way. They started working for us behind the scenes for some reason, try to advocate for us. And then we're calling saying, well, what's going on? And then the stickler guy, eventually he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess if the fireman says that's okay. And so then we had to try to call the unicorn. You know, we actually had to try to call the mythical creature. And somehow, Kelly gets through to him. He gets the call, takes the call. He listens. He's super nice. He says, you know what, it's okay. And then he says, actually, yeah, it's fine. And then the other guy convinced the other guy, and then he said, just redraw the plans and then send them over. It should be fine. It's no problem. And you don't have to change anything about the glass. You don't have to spend any money at all. It should be fine. Don't worry about it at all. All this striving, all this work, and all of a sudden, just like that, it's poof, it's away. And then we're talking to the fire marshal's like, you know what? You could just meet this week if you've already got this, and this done. He's like, it's fine. Just go ahead and meet. If he were here right now, we could give him a hug or a pat on the rear or something. We need to give him some underground love. And if you know the guy, if you know him, just give him a high five or give him a kiss on the cheek or something. Tell him we really love him. Appreciate him. That's good. Thank you for the sound effects. It might be small. The story might not be that significant to you. But it represents something. It feels like we are exiles in this world. And we need to know that God doesn't just care about us, but He intercedes for us. That from time to time, He actually deploys help for you, invisible help for you. It made me feel just a little bit this week, and I think some of the staff might feel the same. It made us feel just a little bit like we were citizens of heaven, but we live on earth. And we need to know, while we're here on earth, are we alone? God, have you abandoned us here? Have you left us here to fight our battles alone? And to begin to feel that the kingdom of God is coming because God is sending us and He's sending others. And that our prayers are being answered, they're being heard, and it is maybe even in just some small way, some small struggle that we had, that the kingdom is coming on earth as it is in heaven. Now, third part of this anatomy of an encounter with God. All people have visions. I mean, crazy people have visions. If you do enough LSD or mushrooms or something like that, you'll have a vision. Vision isn't enough. Seeing something in your mind's eye isn't enough. Can we agree on that? There needs to be more. If you just have these weird visions, and some of you do, and I love you. I really do love you. I love you and I need you in my life. Keep dreaming dreams. Keep being like that. But really, honestly, I'm going to tell you something for a second. If you're one of these dreamer types that has all these visions, but there is no words that come with it, it's not enough. It's not enough to see things that you cannot interpret and then tell people about those things. That is not biblical. What we need is to hear God speak about that vision. This is the next part of what takes place here. God makes a promise about what we have seen. He speaks about it. He comments on it. He said, you see that? And then He explains to us, this is why I showed you that. This is what that means. And it is interesting that Jacob has to hear the same promise that was given to his father and given to his father's father, that it has to become personal. That promise has to be given to him personally. That as much as legacy matters, it could not simply be passed on from one father to another. It had to be God Himself that says to each new generation, in His own way, has to come to that generation and say, what I said to them also applies to you. Promise has to be personal. And it's something that God then gives Jacob directly. Now, I think this is interesting. There's something called the Cobra effect. If you've ever read Freakonomics, or if you know of this sort of very old image, there's a thing called the Cobra effect. Now, the Cobra effect is, I guess in a general sense, it's when you try to solve a problem and you actually make the problem worse. And some of you, that's your whole life story. But so maybe you need to hear this. What is the Cobra effect? But I think there's a kind of Cobra effect in relationship to ministry and people that do ministry. The term comes from a story. This is something that happened in India where they had a cobra problem. And that would be a serious problem. Can we agree? If there are cobras everywhere in your city, and that was the problem. The cobras were everywhere, and cobras are bad, and they're snakes. Are we clear? You don't seem alarmed enough. Cobras in your city. In your house, in your bathroom. Cobras everywhere. So to curtail the cobra problem, the government decided that they would pay a bounty for every cobra killed. So in other words, I got an idea. Let's just make everybody cobra hunters, cobra ninjas. And so everybody will be out there trying to kill cobras, because if they can kill a cobra, turn that cobra in, they can get a little bit of money. So that's going to turn people loose, that it becomes a lucrative thing that'll make that everybody will be out trying to look for and kill cobras because they can get money for it. Make sense? Yeah? Makes sense? Here's the problem. What happened was, once they started giving money for cobras, people got it in their mind. They got this idea, well, man, if we get money for cobras, let's start breeding them. So they actually started breeding cobras. Let's grab some cobras. Don't kill them. That's a nice one. You know what I mean? Let's make some more. And so they'd make all these cobras. And so they were breeding cobras to kill them, to have enough to cull, to bring in, to make money. And it became a booming business, like breeding cobras in India. And then what happened when people said, oh my God, this is backfiring. We thought we were going to pay people to kill cobras, and now they're actually breeding cobras. This is not working. There are more cobras now in India than there were before, and so we need to stop doing this. So they said, man, let's scrap this whole program. So that they scrapped the program, which made all the breeders of cobras go, just let them go. So they released all of their cobras because they weren't worth money anymore. And now there's more cobras than there ever were. I think that happens in ministry. Let me explain to you how the Cobra effect happens in ministry. One generation hears God, and so they don't just go and reach kids or reach a neighborhood or reach professionals or reach a certain ethnic group or whatever. They don't just do it because they think it needs to be done. They do it because they heard God call them to do it, and it's something real and personal, because they had a vision for what the world could look like if God came to that place. And when they have that vision, then they hear God make a promise to them that I will use you to effect some kind of change, to bring the kingdom in that place. And so they do that. And then what happens, an interesting thing happens. People come in through that ministry and they become a part of it, and they start working alongside that same vision, that same heart. And then 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 spiritual generations pass, and then you have people doing that mission, doing that work, never having heard that word from God. And they don't operate the same way. Now they do it for a different reason. Now they're just turning in cobras for money. See, there's a difference between understanding and calling a population to say, we have a cobra problem. Let's all try to deal with that problem together, and understanding what that core problem is and actually committing yourself to that cause, to the cause of the betterment of the people, of your city, your society, of the kingdom coming, which is, I'm going to say it, I mean, when the kingdom comes, there's not a cobra problem. I mean, can we just admit, that's a vision we should all have for the kingdom of God, that it wouldn't be cobras everywhere, eating babies, or whatever cobras do. Can we agree? A cobra-free world. This is a part of what the kingdom should be. And so you commit to that cause, you believe in that cause, and because you do, it's maybe you get money for it, maybe you don't, but that's not the point. But then when generations pass and people start making their living out of it, they start feeling like, well, this is my place, this is where I belong. It's no longer about God, and it's no longer about the cause. It's somehow about something else, some self-interest there. When people aren't committed to the goal itself, to the vision itself, they begin to do the things of God for some other reason and for selfish gain. Maybe people do it because their predecessor did it, or because that's just what we've always done. Isn't that that idea, that thought infected our churches? That's just how we do it. That's just how we've always done it. Well, why? Why do you do it that way? That's just what we do. That's just how we do it. We have to care about the promise. We have to know and hear God, the God of our fathers, speak our name and say to us, I will be with you. I will keep you. I am your father's God, and I am yours too. You're not cut off from the family that matters. I made a promise to them. I make a promise to you. Take it for yourself. And to hear him say, I mean, every human being has to hear him say in their life, I am with you. I will not abandon you. Forget about your father. Forget about the ministry that you're part of. You, I won't abandon you. You're not alone. I know you feel like you're alone, but you're not alone. To speak directly. And I find this so beautiful, so sensitive, that God would speak directly to Jacob's loneliness. That he wouldn't just call him into the great cause of the blessing of the nations. He does that, but he also speaks so tenderly, so gently to this broken, wicked man, right to his loneliness. Will you hear God say that to you today? Those of you that are in the in-between places, can you hear him say, I am with you. You are not alone. I will see you through this. I will make a land for you and a home for you. Don't you see how that promise isn't just for this one man? It's also for you. Jacob, the liar in exile, must meet and know God as Emmanuel, as the God who is with us. And not just Jacob the man. This theme is important in Scripture itself. Not just Jacob the man, but Jacob the people, Israel, the people in exile, the people in conflict, the people that are fugitives from this world must hear God reveal himself as Emmanuel, so that they know to whom they call on in the time of trouble. I call on the one who is with me. That I'm not alone when I face these challenges here. I've never been alone. And I know to call upon Emmanuel and to hear the words of Isaiah say, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. O come to us, the one who is with us, and save us. And God is willing in this incredible gesture to stand beside Jacob. And it makes me shake my head in disbelief and then smile. What a God. Now, we need more insurance. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on. We had a board meeting recently, and one of the things that the board was really on me about is like, Brian, you need more insurance. We have like $3 million coverage or something like that. And we just take on sick, ridiculous liability with all of you. You guys are crazy people. And we cover so many ministries doing so many reckless, risky things. We don't care. We just go for it. We cover you with our name and so on. And so we're extended. Our risk is extreme for a ministry, for a mission. And so it's just a constant question that we have. Do we have enough insurance, to protect us? Now, I just think the whole thing should be on me, because when people come after me, they'll find out I have nothing, and it'll just be the joke will be on them. They'll come sue me, and I'll be like, you can have it all. And they'll get my books, and that's in my car, and that'll be that. And we'll all be fine. It's fine. But it's a serious thing. Turns out, one of the things our insurance agent keeps pushing us on is we don't have any sort of coverage for employee malfeasance, for any sort of misconduct, from sexual harassment and that sort of thing. So, what's going to happen if one of our employees does something inappropriate or something, we get sued, we're going to get nailed. We have no coverage on that. So, something Brooke is really pushing me on. Brian, we have to get this. I don't know if I should take that personally, like she really thinks that I need to have this sort of coverage. But the employee misconduct, we're not covered for that at all. The board found out about this, said, Brian, we really need to do this. We need to get covered on this whole issue of potential malfeasance or some sort of misconduct. Now, here's the thing, and we started talking about this in the board meeting. The thing that sort of really scares you, it's not so much, because you could sit back and say, no, that's not going to happen. Our people, our employees are of such high character, such high caliber, that they would never say anything inappropriate of a sexual nature. That will never, ever happen, I know I would never do something like that, obviously. But it's not just that. It's not just deciding how good are your people. And even if you believe that they would never, ever make any sort of mistakes, never succumb to any sort of bad situation or whatever, even if that were true, the problem with sexual misconduct in particular, the problem is that someone could just level an accusation against you and it doesn't have to be true. Now, that'll keep you up at night if you're a leader. You start thinking about the possibility that someone could just come and say about me, they could just say, he did this to me, or he said this to me, or he did something wrong or something heinous to me. And all of a sudden, and I don't want to be an alarmist here, but this is the truth. All of a sudden, the whole underground could be in jeopardy by that. There could be some sort of lawsuit, frivolous or not frivolous, and it could just tear the whole ministry down. It actually gives you a little bit of cold sweats because you start thinking it's not so much about, it's like, Wes just got a motorcycle recently. He's like, it's fine. I know how to drive a motorcycle. I've been driving a motorcycle a long time. I'm like, you're going to die. He said, no, I'm not going to die. I know how to drive a motorcycle. I said, and this is what you say when you're on the other side of the motorcycle question. What do you say? It's not you. It's the people that are going to hit you. You might be a great driver, but the problem is you don't know all these people driving around you that run into you and kill you. That's the problem. It can be very unsettling to begin to think about the choices that other people make that can be reckless or crazy even. And of course, you'd have to take something like that seriously. So would you. If some sort of accusation was leveled against me, you couldn't just write it off. You couldn't just be like, well, that's not possible. That's Brian. You'd have to take it seriously. And even if it were not true, the whole thing would begin to shake. And I actually started really thinking about this recently. I thought, what would I do if this happened? It's scary. It threatened the whole organization, threatened you, threatened our fidelity, it threatened our enterprise, it threatened your work, because now somehow I'm called into question. Rightly or wrongly, it wouldn't matter. The issue is that if I were called into question, you know what I actually thought? I actually began to think, well, I would just step down. Immediately I would step down. And in a way, that's sad because, they'd win, the devil would win or whatever, but I wouldn't want to prolong that. I wouldn't want to threaten you in any way. I just want to get out of it. And I started actually thinking, working that out in my head, how would I feel about that? If I had to step down, if I had to lose everything, maybe even your respect or maybe even your relationship, if I had to lose it all, and I started thinking about what would I do, how would I feel? And I'm going to share this sort of internal journey because I think it's relevant here. And I don't know, maybe it's important for somebody to hear this today, but I'm going to tell you a wave of undeniable and supernatural truth came over me, gripped me. I started thinking nothing would fundamentally change about me. Nothing. I am still who I am. I am still God's. I would still be God's. You can strip me of everything. Respect, position, leadership, money, home, possessions. What does it change about me? Nothing. Nothing. I am still me. I am still loved by God. My core identity cannot be touched by those circumstances. The core of who I am, of what I have been made by this affection of God, which I do not deserve, which I never earned in the first place. That's why failure, even if it were true, couldn't take it away. And certainly not false accusation could not take it away. Everything will be okay with me. I still would belong to Him. I'd just go cut lawns or deliver the mail or build birdhouses. I don't know what I'd do. And I'd build great birdhouses. And I'd share Jesus with whoever bought one of my birdhouses. And I'd be fine. God, I might have less stress in my life, actually. It's actually sort of nice to think about, Birdhouses. I would still be a witness for Him. Even in my tattered life, my shattered existence, all the more. You know what I realized in that moment? I just want to serve Him. For what He's done for me, I'm His. I just want to serve Him. And wherever He calls me, wherever He puts me, that's fine with me. I don't need to be here. You could put me anywhere in the world and I will be God's man. Give me a humble job or a great job, I don't care. This sort of echoing question occurred to me. What about your dream, Brian? What about the underground, which is your dream? How could you go on living without seeing that dream fulfilled? Guys, I only dream this dream because God has put it in my heart. I don't need to do anything. I only need to be His and to serve Him wherever He calls me. And yes, this fire burns inside of me, and I think it's a lifelong fire. And I will, for as long as I have breath, serve you, love you, build this thing that we're doing together. But if for some reason I must go away, whether it's through the will of God or the will of men or Satan or whatever, if I must go somewhere else, nothing changes about who I am. Nothing changes. Because I am His. And though He slay me, yet will I serve Him. From the heart of David. I know He'll use me somehow, somewhere. And when He's done with me, that's okay too. Nothing, no one, no circumstance can take that from us. And Paul said, we are convinced that neither death nor life, principalities, nor angels, nor demons, nor anything in heaven or earth, nothing can separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. Nothing. We are convinced. We are convinced. Are you convinced that nothing can separate you from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus? Nothing. You are not your job. You are not your leadership position. You are God's possession, His child. That is who you are, and that can never be taken away from you. And He has spoken to me, to you, to us, to His people. I am with you. Come what may, I will keep you. He will not discard you no matter what you do, no matter what is done to you. He makes this incredible promise to keep you. You remember Toy Story, the movie Toy Story? There's like 3 of them now. Is there 4 of them? There's 3 of them. Toy Story? Come on, guys, be with me here. Toy Story. You know when I watch Toy Story, there's this smoldering sadness in the whole movie. Do you get this? It's a story about toys that live for the affection of their boy, their owner. You remember this? And their whole life is about wanting to be played with by the boy. And that moment where he comes and grabs them, and the favorite toy and the discarded toys. Remember the toys that the pig with the spring in the middle or whatever nobody wants to play with? Is it a dog? What is it? I don't know what it is. It's a wiener dog. It's a wiener dog. Skylar said the other day, man, I know God is the greatest gift, but the second is a wiener dog. The little wiener dog that the kid doesn't play with anymore. And somehow, I don't know if this is true, but somehow I think the writers of that movie must have kicked themselves like halfway into writing it. This will be cute toys and in a room, the boys' room, and won't that be cute? And then they realize in the middle of it, they've got the saddest thing they've ever thought about, the saddest context that you could possibly think about, because all of them have this inevitable truth that he will one day no longer play with you. Even Woody, who's kind of, or is it the Spaceman? I don't know. They both have this they have this race, like who's the boy going to love more? And Woody's the older toy, and the Spaceman, what's his name? Buzz Lightyear is thank you. I should really prepare for these stories better. Buzz Lightyear is the one that is the new toy, and so he's cool. He's got the bells and whistles, and there's that threat. But even as the story arc goes on, 3 movies in, if you watch the last story, it's so sad. They have to deal with this smoldering sadness that all of them eventually will be discarded by the boy. And there's some dream that they have that maybe he'll go take them to college, it's no. And if you do, no, that's not good, by the way. No, leave your dolls at home. High schoolers, it's okay, move on, leave them. They're not real, they don't feel it, it's okay. But maybe he'll take me to college, play with me, but then you just sit in a box. And they have to deal with that reality, that sad, so insurmountably sad background of the movie. That the boy will one day grow up, and it's just a matter of time before he does not want them anymore. He will play with them for a while and even love them, but eventually he will tire of them. And listen to this. This is an important turn of this phrase. He will not keep them. He will not keep them. I'm reminded of G.K. Chesterton, who said that God is infinitely young and He can keep you forever. Sin makes us say, like Cain, I'm not my brother's keeper. And the holiness of God means that He says, I am your keeper, and I will never tire of you. I will be your keeper forever. Because He's infinitely young. He never doesn't want you. He is with you, and He will keep you, and He will bring you home. The first three parts of what an encounter with God looks like is really about God, what God does. God comes to us in the in-between places, and then God shows us a vision of this world, this earth, touched somehow by heaven, changed somehow by heaven. Then He speaks a promise about that thing which He's shown us. That's all about God. So far you've done nothing, but here's your part. Number 4, last thing, what you must do in that moment, and when it comes to you, young Christian, when that moment comes to you, old Christian, when that moment comes to you, and God does appear to you, and those 3 things occur, those 3 things happen, here is what you do. This is your response to that. It is to make a vow. Because that's what we do in these magnanimous situations. We must respond with a vow of faithfulness to that gift. And then to begin to build something real in this world that represents and remembers what you've seen. This is what Jacob does right. He knows, as foolish as he is, as far from God as he is, he knows that a moment like this is important. And he recognizes that. And in commemoration of this moment, he says, let's name this place. And let me make a vow to God about this moment. And yes, let me begin to grab real things, tangible things in this world and begin to build an altar for God. This is our strategy, by the way. This is our missiology. This is everything we are as an organization. It is wrapped up in this one moment. We must build real altars. The vision, the promise may come in a dream, but the response must be in the waking world. And some of us want to stay in sort of a dreamlike state with God, stupor with God. It's a mistake, and furthermore, it's no good to anyone else. Nobody wants to hear any more about your dreams if those dreams don't come into this world and make it better. It means that this place gets named. And then that new place that is named for God for that moment is acted upon. The vision, which becomes a promise, then becomes a place in the world and becomes an altar. A place of worship and witness. What is an altar? An altar is a place built for God, where God is talked about and where the witness to His kingdom happens and where God is then worshipped because of the truth of who He is being made real. And Jacob is not just a spectator to some religious phenomenon. Shame on us, Western Christians, for liking to watch people have religious experiences with God. Instead, he recognizes that this thing has happened to me, and I must act then upon it. He changes the world he lives in. He changes his direction and the purpose of his life, and he makes a vow. This is why, by the way, you can't have these every week, because they demand a vow, and you cannot just keep stacking vow upon vow in your life. Can you understand that, right? Because vows take lifetimes to fulfill. You can't screw around with a vow, you see. And yet the only appropriate response to something like this is to make a vow. You say, well, man, I don't want to have too many of these in my life. And you don't. You actually don't want to have this many sort of definitive moments in your life because they are, well, definitive. They must then, therefore, shape and change your life. And then you make some kind of vow to God and you say, God, okay, because you've shown me this thing, because you've shown me what the world could, what Haiti could look like, because you've shown me what our inner cities could look like, because you've shown me what homelessness could look like in this city. I must therefore make a vow with the whole of my life to that thing. And it's not something you can finish in a year. Of course, then, we make these sort of vows because it's the only right response. By the way, it's what you do when you feel love, real love. I've always thought that love and sickness go together. In fact, even that's true if you think about it. Love and sickness go together because it's something so powerful. Even the way that we express it in literature is there is such a thing as love sickness. And actually, when you feel love for a person, really feel that strong sort of thing that we call love toward another person, you can't not be around them. It makes you ill when you're not with them. You feel like your whole life needs to become an orbit around that person. And when we feel that way, you know what we're compelled to do? I can prove to you this is something that God has put inside you, your DNA. What you're compelled to do when you feel that is make a vow. That's why nobody will ever get rid of marriage. There's nothing, we don't have to defend marriage. There's this whole idea of like conservative politics or whatever, we need to go fight for marriage. You know you don't. Here's why. Because human beings will always fall in love with other human beings, and they will always then feel that urge at that moment to make a vow. They'll do it. It doesn't matter. If we stop sanctioning it or stop talking about it, they're still going to feel it, because that's what we feel when we feel great love. I must promise myself to you. And you know why? Because we know implicitly in ourselves that I love you now, but I might not in a week, and I might not in a year. And because you mean so much to me, because I know that somehow this is so important, that I will then promise that on those days that I do not feel what I feel right now, I will stay faithful to you. I will stay committed to you. It's like we know that this thing is going to break down. That's why we make a vow. Jacob makes a vow because he says, as great as I feel about this moment right now, I know I'll probably waver. I know I'll probably forget it. And so I will make a vow to God now about my future and my connection to him. And that's why we do it. We do it because we know we're going to need it in the days and weeks and years to come. I married Monica because I didn't just want to love her until I was tired of her. Because I wanted to love her until I died. And that's why we make a vow. Because she deserved to be loved like that. And so does God. But here's the thing, it's all initiated by God, and I'm almost done. God has made a vow to the world. He's made a vow to us, with us. We're the last to join in the thing. All this amazing stuff happens to Jacob. He's the last one to do or say anything. All the big stuff's already been done. All he has to do is then go, yeah, count me in. That's what he does, right? He just says, I'm in. Totally. What? Who wouldn't be? I'm alone anyway. I'm totally afraid and I'm totally ashamed. This is awesome. And wait. God is saying, I will be your God. I will be with you. I'll never forsake you. I'll keep you. What is he going to say? What sane person says pass? Of course you say yes, but all the hard work, the heavy lifting has already been done by God. So we make this promise. Let me invite up the musicians so I can close. Let's try to think of a contemporary or somewhat contemporary example of what this might look like in our time, in our day. And I thought of a very potent moment in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, most of you know that I'm very influenced by the story of the Civil Rights Movement. And some of you may or may not know this, but King, even though he grew up in the church, obviously the son of a preacher, goes off to seminary. He's still sort of in an existential search, and he was an intellectual. And he struggled with whether or not he should go into the ministry. Part of the reason why he struggled whether he should go into the ministry, I think, is because I don't know that he really felt that he had a personal relationship with God. Certainly not at that place. He goes through seminary, graduates with high marks. He was well regarded by his peers and by his professors. But he graduates seminary and he has this wrestling match with himself and with God. Like, what would he do? What does he want to do with his family? And so he decides to take, as most of you know, he decides to take a church there in Montgomery. And that's his first job, his first assignment is to be the pastor of this church in Montgomery. And it's there, in the midst of whatever it is, history conspiring to that moment in that place and time. It's there that this young 27-year-old leader is asked to become the head of the Montgomery Improvement Association. He's asked to be the spearhead, the spokesman for this brand new initiative, this bus boycott, which happens, which is, of course, known, most of you know about in history. But he's almost thrust into this position of extraordinary pressure. Never asked for it, certainly wasn't prepared for it, never trained for it, was never taught about it. I mean, you can say that in some sense God had ideologically and philosophically prepared the man for this moment. Tillich and Gandhi and all the things that poured into his philosophy of life and ministry and nonviolence, which would come to be the shining beacon of the gospel in the midst of the civil rights movement. Of course, he was the right man at the right time for that job, of course that. But he doesn't know that. Try to imagine you're 27 years old. You just took a job as the pastor of a church. You're not even sure that you even know God in a personal way. And you stumble into this moment in time and space, and he's 11 weeks into the bus boycott. You have to understand, the pressures were mounting. The hatred of the white people, the threats on his life and the lives of his compatriots, the pressures from middle-class blacks. Because they shut down all the buses, people needed to get to work. They couldn't walk. Many of them couldn't walk. It was too far. And so they created this carpool system. There's about 300 to 350 cars that middle-class blacks owned in the city of Montgomery at the time, and they marshaled all of them. They got them all going, somehow miraculously going, picking people up, taking them, this free taxi service that they put together in a moment's notice. They're 11 weeks in, and the cracks are beginning to show. The cops start pulling them over and giving tickets to the carpool drivers and suspending their licenses, and the cracks are beginning to show. The middle-class blacks are putting so much pressure on King and the other leaders just to get this thing done. The problem is they really thought that they would go into these negotiations with some kind of moral authority, and that because they would have this moral authority that these city fathers, these white entrenched leaders would somehow give in, but they wouldn't. And it became clearer and clearer that they were never going to convince them to desegregate those buses. And almost on this multiple level, the hatred of white people toward him, and they did hate him. Pressure of middle-class blacks to get this thing done. This is too much. This is not working. And then I like how Taylor Brants puts it, the raw courage and yet neediness of the poor common folk. Always needing something from him. His time, his energy. It was destroying him. It was exhausting this young 27-year-old unprepared for this moment. There's a story that's told not just by historians, but by himself in one of the most beautiful and poignant sermons that you'll ever hear from him. It's a story, I believe, about his conversion. He talks about being in his bed one night and just not being able to sleep. You know, sleep would not come to him, just restless. Coretta was asleep. And so the phone rings. In the middle of the night, he picks up the phone. And it is the voice of yet another voice of hatred that threatens, within a week, you will regret that you ever came to Montgomery. He hangs up the phone, and it's just like the straw that breaks his back. He just cannot stop thinking about it. He cannot sleep. So he gets up from his bed, he goes, and this is the way he describes it. He made himself a pot of coffee. And he sat there at his kitchen table, and he put his face in his hands, and he cried. He was done. He was out. He was empty. And he cried out to God, whom he had never, he said, had a personal encounter with, never had a Jacob's ladder kind of experience. And he cried out to God in that in-between place, in that place of lostness and emptiness, of tiredness. And he said, I cannot do this alone. I can't take it anymore. And he said, if they're looking to me for strength, the whole thing is going to fail. And he says in that moment, he felt a peace come over him. And he felt that he heard the voice of God for the first time in his life. Jesus came to him and said, I am with you. This is what we have to hear. Because King had seen a vision of this world touched by heaven. He had seen a vision not just of desegregated buses, but of an America that was somehow different, somehow changed, somehow more like the kingdom of God than the kingdom of this world. He had seen that vision, but that vision weighed upon him, and he could not bear the weight of it until God spoke a promise to him, to say, I'm with you. And a peace came over him. And he said it changed him forever. He knew that God was with him, and he felt God say to him, son, do what is right. Do what you know is right. Less than a week later, this is such a potent point in time in his life. Less than a week later, this is all what's corresponding to this moment in time in history, is that they're also making a strategic decision. The NAACP had made a strategic decision to file a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, against the city of Montgomery, claiming that segregation itself was illegal. And that was their new sort of play. And they weren't sure how it was going to be received, and so he began to do this sort of politicking among the people who had been walking for 11 weeks, and they kept walking. And every night they would have these mass meetings to keep people's spirits up because it was so much of a burden for everyone to bear. So they would gather together for moments of inspiration, to turn to God and to somehow say, keep going, keep walking. That was their mantra. Keep walking, keep walking. Hang in one more day. But even though those cracks were beginning to show, they said, we need another strategy because these people are never going to give in. So they decided to file this lawsuit. And it was at that next mass meeting at Ralph Abernathy's church there, First Baptist in Montgomery, where they had 2,000 people come in, and as it was most nights. And it was time to sort of give that news that they were going to take this new strategy. And there at that meeting, he got up and he did his thing. He gave a talk. And after it was over, I find this so beautiful. This is all a part of an unraveling of a story of about a week in this man's life. And he finished speaking and he sat down, and there was a woman, one of the oldest women in the whole, oldest people in the whole movement. They called her Old Mother Pollard. She was so old that everybody said, you need to not walk, Mother Pollard. Everybody else can walk, but not you. You're too old. And she said, I got to walk. And I'm going to keep walking. And nobody could keep her from walking. She had one of the famous sayings that everyone repeated that was a kind of inspiration for the whole movement. My feet is tired, but my soul is rested. Something that they kept repeating. And so she had a place of kind of honor in the movement. And anytime she wanted to, and this was something that might happen from time to time at one of the mass meetings, she might just get up from her seat and walk forward because she had something to say. And this was one of those moments where Mother Pollard felt like she had something to say. So King had finished speaking, he sat down, and she just got up from her seat and she walked forward. And out of respect for her, of course, she was allowed to have the microphone. And she looks over at King and she says, son, come here. So he stood up and he walked over to her, and she said this. I find this so incredible. She said, something's wrong with you. You didn't talk strong tonight. Can you imagine that? I can't. Please don't tell me that I have a bad sermon. I don't want to hear that at that moment. Please don't do it in front of everyone. Come up here, Brian. Come up here. Why was that so bad? Why? What's wrong with you? Something is wrong with you, she said. You didn't talk strong tonight. And King sort of annoyed, a little bit frustrated, but out of honor said, oh, Mother Pollard, nothing's wrong with me. I'm feeling fine as ever. And this is what she said to him in front of this crowd of 2,000 people. She said, you can't fool me. I knows something is wrong. Is it that we ain't doing things to please you? Or is it that the white folks is bothering you? And then she said these words to him as a kind of confirmation of what he heard from the Spirit of God at his own breakfast table. I done told you, we is with you all the way. But even if we ain't with you, God's going to take care of you. He said in his own account of that moment, he said that a fearlessness came over him. A wave of energy as his eyes welled up with tears, hearing again this word from God. And And just minutes later, as he sat down in the front of that church, just minutes later, he sees people buzzing around in the back. Abernathy goes back. Something is wrong. Someone had gone down to the basement and come back up, and there's people milling around in the back. Something is wrong. And so he gets up and he moves to the back of that church. And he pulls aside Ralph Abernathy, his closest friend, and he says to him, "What's going on? What's happened?" And Abernathy didn't want to tell him yet, but he said, "You need to tell me what's going on." And he says to him, "Your house has just been bombed." "Are Coretta and the baby okay?" That was his response. And Abernathy said, "We don't know yet. We haven't heard." So he walked up to the front of that audience and he said, "I need to go. This is what's happened. I want everyone to quietly leave peaceably." This is the man that he was. "Quietly leave peaceably. I need to go. I need to look after my family. I need to find out what's going on." They whisk him away. They put him in the back of a car. They drive him to his house. And when he gets there, he finds this very disturbing scene. His house surrounded by 200-300 people, his neighbors, and they're angry. It's a mob. It's a riot, and they're standing outside his house. Boys are running around with broken Coke bottles, ready for a fight. Grown men have their guns out, ready, itching for a fight. One man is actually calling for a shootout with the police. The police are surrounding the house. Inside the house is the mayor and the fire marshal, the chief of police, the commissioner. They're all there inside the house, all white, surrounded by an angry black neighborhood who feels again that they've been threatened. And their leader, their friend, his wife, and his 10-week-old baby, and that wicked voice that called only a week earlier made true on that promise and set off a bomb in his house. And he walked into the back, and most of you may know this story, he walked to the back of the house to find that Coretta and the baby were okay. And once he had given thanks for that, and he wrapped them up in his arms, he took on the form of a commander. Something was different about him, and he took on this sort of thing that we see in him from this point on in his life, this remarkable calmness, peace in the face of extraordinary circumstances. And he whispers to his wife, "Honey, why don't you just get dressed?" And he straightens up and he walks out. He gets a report from the police of what had happened, and he hears this riot ensuing outside. People calling for blood, calling for restitution, which they should. The calm of a commander. Bombs were going off. Bombers were on the loose. Riot was threatening outside. His own family just had escaped death, and yet he does not panic. He walks outside, raises his hand, and in utter calm, this is what he said: "Do not panic. Don't get your weapons. And if you have weapons, take them home." I can't imagine being 27 years old. I can't imagine having a mob outside wanting to stand beside me and fight for me and with me for my family and not setting them loose. And yet he had had a vision, this man. An imperfect man who I think barely knew God at this point in his life, but he had a vision of something extraordinary, of heaven touching earth. And he became changed by that vision. And God had made a promise to him: "No matter what happens, son, I will be with you. I will keep you." And he had confirmed that promise in the face of that old woman. And then he could stand there and make an altar for God. And then he could stand there while the bombs are going off, while the threat is raging. He said, "If you have weapons, take them home. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword." Remember what Jesus said. We want to love our enemies. And he looked at this crowd and he said, "I want you to love our enemies. Be good to them. This is what we must live by. Meet hate with love." And then he welled up in a kind of oration, which happened to him in these moments. He said, "I did not start this boycott. I was asked by you to serve as one of your spokesmen. And I want it to be known the length and breadth of this land that if I am stopped, this movement will not stop. If I am stopped, our work will not stop. What we are doing is just." And this is how he finishes: "God is with us. Go home and sleep calm." White police officers would later recount this story and say that that man saved their life that night. Who knows the violence that could have ensued? The lives lost, thrown away. God gave that man a vision of the world changed, not just of desegregated buses, but a different kind of world. And God made a promise to him. You are not alone. In prayer and in the faces of his people. And so King made a vow that would take the whole of his life to fulfill. And then it got hard and the bombs started going off. It got dark. And the burdens that he was carrying, the hatred of the whites, the threats, the complaints, the neediness. And then he built an altar right there in his front yard, in his front porch, with real things and real people. He built an altar to the Sermon on the Mount. He built an altar to the crucified God, who said, love your enemies, because he loved us when we were enemies. And on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread, and after he gave thanks, he blessed it and he broke it. He said, this is my body. Take it and eat it to remember me. And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup and he said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of sin. Drink it to remember me. I don't know what else to say. Just search your own heart. Listen for God. When you're ready, this is the body and blood of Jesus given for you.